Great. So let's start, Leon, with you. Introduce yourself. What do you do? And how did you find yourself in this job?
I'm Leon Walthall. I am a physician, internal medicine doc at USC. Mostly. I do that and teach. So a big part of sort of my love and my calling is on the teaching side as well. So I can interact with the students and the residents and the learners there at USC. Those are the things that I very much love. Found myself there by sort of finding that I love the sciences and I also love people. I tried to do like bench research for a minute in college and realized that I was too much of an extrovert. So therefore, sort of found that those two things met at doing the work of trying to heal the body. And I won't, no.
That's great. That's very impressive.
Stop? Okay, very good.
More than sufficient. Great job.
I'm Lucy Sanders. I'm an employment attorney and have been for probably 12 years. I found myself in that career. I think when I was younger, I distinctly remember wanting to be a paramedic because I really wanted to help people at a time when people needed help. Like I just identified that as I want to be able to help and problem solve and make a difference. That's not what I ended up doing, but I think I do that through the law. And I found myself in that career, not really, it was never my plan to go to law school. I actually thought I wouldn't like it. My father's an attorney, my grandfather's an attorney. I have plenty of cousins who are attorneys and I thought it seemed boring. But I was working after college as an intern for a place called the Center for Theological Exploration of Vocation. So
Indianapolis?
it was funded by the Eli Lilly Corporation. And through that year, I was trying to figure out what was next. And without going into the whole story, I still feel strongly that God spoke very, very, very clearly to me that law school was next for me. It's probably the clearest answer I've ever had. So I followed that and came into this career as an employment lawyer with literally no background in employment law. I didn't take the employment law classes. I never saw that as kind of a specialty, but through a lot of different circumstances, it's just where I ended up. I've been doing it for a long time and can talk more about kind of how I see that overlapping with what you talked about.
Smallest little footnote. Some years ago, I was asked by the Lilly Endowment to enter into that same project. It was a very visionary grant, very generously funded grant. The question I was asked to take up was asking theological seminaries all over America, from Duke Divinity School to Gordon Conwell Seminary to Fuller, all over the country, really. How do you teach vocation? Thank you.
That's great.
Yeah.
Hi, I'm Karina, and I am working in education. So I work particularly in reading intervention in elementary school.
Very good.
I got into that, it was during the pandemic, and I had been working in hospitality just 2 blocks that way at a luxury hotel. I knew that was not my calling forever, but that's where I was. And it was after a really hard week here in Charleston with, the pandemic was happening. The riots had happened after George Floyd's death, and it was a really hard place to be working in hospitality. It was the end of a really hard week, and I was like, Lord, I need to know what's next. So I started looking at grad programs, because I knew I wanted to go to grad school at some point, and I found a literacy specialist program. And I come from a family of teachers, but I didn't know that you could actually specialize in literacy and in reading. I didn't know those positions were out there. And what I just came to see was how that specialty was something that really united things in my background, things that I loved, and things that I really cared about and wanted to do. So that's how I ended up in education, and I love it.
Thank you very much.
I'm Jeffrey. I work in HR at Boeing. I ended up there unexpectedly. Immediately after college, I worked in campus ministry, and when kind of in that time, when it seemed like the Lord was telling me that time was over, I assumed I was going to go to seminary, and spent a lot of time praying about that. And lo, I guess God said no, so I didn't go to seminary. And so instead, I just for months I prayed about just kind of what it was, and the only way I know to describe it is for all the ways it didn't make sense. One day it made sense for me to look into HR school, which was a shock to me and to everybody who knew me. My only forays in the business school in college were econ because you had to take it in a theater class, which Wayne would never. So I've never had like this burning desire to be a part of a business or anything like that. And now I work for one of the largest companies in the world. I just said, okay, I think this is what God has called me to do. It doesn't make a lot of sense, but I'm going to do it. And it was relatively difficult because I like ministry in the world of that. And my quick rationalization or best rationalization I come to is, well, I think God needs people in big business who also have the desire to maybe be in some form of pastoral ministry. That being in pastoral ministry doesn't necessarily mean you have to be a pastor. It was at least what I told myself so I guess to go forward and do it. And so I ended up in HR, and I've been doing that for about.
You can see your question was Howard E. Butt's question decades ago. Who's calling me? My Father in heaven, my Father on earth. Business, how does it relate to ministry? The lady God was born of that dilemma for him. I had lunch 2 days ago with a man from Seattle, had a whole career with Boeing. He used to be the head of R&D for Boeing. Wrote a good book called The Accidental Executive along the way. Study of Moses, interestingly. Al Arison, look it up. Let me ask you this question, each of you. When you hear these words, as theologically mature as you are professionally competent, what do you think about in terms of what you do, work that is yours, physician, HR attorney, labor rights attorney, media specialist, the Boeing employee? I mean, what does it mean? What do you feel like the weight and reality is of that identifier in terms of your own life, as theologically mature as I am professionally competent? There's no one way to answer the question.
I think what I've learned, and I represent a lot of employees, so I represent a lot of employees who have been wronged by someone and who are very hurt and in a time of crisis. And I figured out pretty quickly on that, to use your words, being professionally competent and theologically mature resulted in the same type of advice, which is that I had what I considered a duty to explain to my clients that we may have the best legal system we've been able to come up with, and it may be a lot better than a lot of other countries, but it's still limited. Mm-hmm. It will not heal what's been done to you. In fact, even if we take this to court and win, you will still feel empty. You will still feel hurt. So I overlap those two terms there in the sense of I think I'm doing my clients a disservice if I tell them that it will fix everything. And I think hopefully I'm giving them a bit of hope when I try to point them in a direction of what could
Good for you.
help.
Yeah. This is not to be cheaply said to you at all, but you can hear why what you just said is your own window into this wrestling I've done with proximate justice. Could you give yourself to some justice? Something honest, something true, even if you knew that everything that might be done won't be done? Thank you. Mm-hmm. Somebody else.
So, the nature of my job, I'm stuck in the middle a lot.
You and all the rest of us.
employees always think that HR is on the side of management and management thinks HR is on the side of the employee. And the reality is we're just on none of your sides. Not inherently, right? And so I think as I think about the nature of what it means to be theologically mature and professionally proficient is this idea of what is God's character and how does that just inform the way I interact with people?
Yeah.
And
You can see why that was that precedent in U2's song. To see it like you do, to feel it like you do.
And so I walk away with, well, okay, God is a God of compassion, but he's also a God of truth.
Yeah.
And so I think the way I try to execute that, I guess the best way I possibly can is to say, regardless of the situation that comes forward, is to say, how do I care about this person to the extent that I can, but not compromise it for the sake of doing what at least it's my ability to come up with the right answer if the right answer is. Knowing that in the brokenness of our situation, someone, like what Lee said, is probably gonna leave a little empty, a little hurt, a little upset, but it's to say, like, to the best of my capacity to do that
Good for you.
in an attempt to be like Jesus.
When Facebook first came into being, I was disdainful for a long time, thinking, the stupidest thing in the whole world. I began to kind of look over my wife's shoulder thinking, somebody said this, that's interesting. I decided to identify myself in those early days, political convictions. So thinking, I'll just say, to do justice, to love mercy, to walk humbly with God. That's who I am politically. I would just say back to you, those are the best words for all of us. What the Lord require of you, as an HR person for going, to do justice, to love mercy, to walk humbly with God, to the best of your ability. Thank you. How would you put it?
I think what Lucy said about there being so much overlap between professional competence and being grounded theologically. The ways that I see students learning best are when you see them as a whole person. And of course, an educator shouldn't be the one to have to meet all of their needs, but they have to be seen as a whole person. And I think that is theologically and professionally, I think that's right at the heart of both. Students don't learn how to love learning if they're not being seen as anything other than a mind. And so it's effective for sure, but I think it's grounded in an ethic of love and care.
It's very, very good. You can see why that Augustinian question from last night. You can ask about this faith, this hope, but you want to get at really what's going on here in the world. What do you love? How that really is the deepest, most probing of all the questions. Because when all is said and done, that's the question. Because it defines who you are. It shapes who you are. Thank you.
I think from my side, it comes a lot to similar things in sort of a different place, right? Like instead of, in my world, the temptation is to see people as just bodies rather than just minds. So similar idea, right? Like this person comes in with X problem, and that's sort of what my students and my colleagues want to focus on, rather than remembering that this is a whole person, and health is not a thing that can be done by looking at a single organ, right? I mean, all of these things are combined together into a unit, and then even that unit of a human cannot be whole and healthy unless they're in the setting of a community that is whole and healthy. And so trying to see that integrate its way up to really think about what is health from that perspective. I think it's part of where that comes into my thoughts on how I communicate with the patient and how I talk to them about how can I get you to quit smoking, which is my goal at this point, but how can I do that in the context of something bigger than just, it's going to give you cancer, right? How do I get you to see that in a bigger space? So I think that's one side. And then the other side, from the student's perspective, being able to bring a similar mindset there of you're not just going to be meeting physical bodies that are decaying. You're going to be meeting immortal souls that have so many aspects in so many directions that will affect how they can be healthy. So, some of those two sides.
I've been looking at a book for the last couple of years on approximation, but I'm done by Christmas.
Oh,
One of the chapters that I've written has about 12 stories all over the world. In Indonesia, Kenya, Ireland, Palestine, Mexico, Canada, Slovakia, and the US. Each of people making these society define it in no different way. One was a professor at the Duke Medical School, and there's a place like this congregation, they looked at church in Durham, North Carolina, had a vision of Vocation weekend. The whole church was there for the weekend, and they all were reading the book, Visions of Vocation, and there was a guy there on Saturday morning. I thought, I was watching her face, she looked skeptical. Who are you? I wish I could know more about you, because it feels like you're not quite sure what I'm saying. At lunchtime, he said, "Can we go for a walk today?" And I said, "Sure." Went for a walk around the lake that afternoon. For 2 hours, he was told about his life. He was a Persian immigrant, came to the States in his 20s, I suppose, did study here, and got appointed to the Duke Medical School early on in his life, and been there ever since. He's the head of radiology now at medical school. He told me, thinking about the proximity, he said, "I teach my residents here that they will be at their best approximators. That at their best, we can see the need," he says. "Yes," he said, "but not completely. We never see the whole thing. We're just not going to do that." But even the technological sophistication of Duke Medical School, all the machine we have to bring to bear, all the cameras with all kinds of sophisticated lenses and everything, we don't really see the knee like that, you see. So I teach them that they will be approximators. They'll get something right, but it won't be everything. It's humbling to see it that way. But in the now but not yet of life for all of us, it's true. What would you want the church to understand about you and to pray for you, week by week, in terms of the vocations that are yours? Great question.
I have a question about this theologically mature. It seems to me like we're talking about, you all are talking about compassion in your work. I don't know whether that's the same thing as theologically mature. You understand what I'm saying?
I do. I would say it is clearly an important face to it. Compassion, of course, is sort of a deeply written, theologically pregnant word. I love etymologies online. Etymological dictionary, one of my favorite places to go on my computer. I just like to know where words came from. Pete likes to talk about this block here and this house here, because he's studied Charleston. And he knows everything about Charleston almost, it seems like where this street was, and where this building came from, what happened over here in this block, He's been a student of Charleston like that. I am my own student of words. I like to know where they came from. Passion, the first time it's used in Oxford Dictionary, OED as it is, a British friend, it's the passion of Christ, interestingly. Its first usage is the passion of Christ. What is it about? Well, it's about actually identifying with the death and resurrection of Jesus. Calm passion, it is with passion, identifying with, entering into the passion of Christ. So in some ways, it's the very heart of our calling, the way that you defined it in your video this week, Pete. The vocation of God becoming our vocations. It hasn't been incarnation, rather just go home. There's nothing else to be said about our lives. So in one way, to say compassion is the heart, yes, I would tease that out probably a little bit more, and I would say, well, compassion born of Micah's words to all of us. What's the word require of you? Do justice. Love mercy, walk humbly with God. In some ways, that gives a little more textured reading to compassion, because it realizes the fact that sometimes, it's public justice, I'm after here in this conversation with this young woman, this older man, who's been wronged at work, you know. It isn't that I'm just feeling sorry for him and trying to say, oh, that was wrong, but it's saying, it's gonna be hard work to enter into this, because it's gonna be complicated, and someone may get hurt, and you may get embarrassed, or, you know, may not get all done, but I'm gonna argue actually, more than a mercenary might argue, I'm gonna argue for public justice to be done, because it's right here. So I would say compassion is a deep, good word for us. Maybe it's expressed in different kinds of ways, different moments in time. Do justice, love mercy, walk in with God. What would you want the church to pray for you? If I'm putting you in that prayer that I offered, that this church in Dallas put together on video, praying for vocations, and I offered a number of them. This person, this person, this person, this person. Even those who long for employment that satisfies. I mean, all kinds of people. Could we pray for you as a church?
I think when you ask the question, can you know the world and still love the world? My thought all weekend has been, how can you not try? Like, shouldn't we? You know, shouldn't that be our goal and our aim? Because you also say, you quoted, what an amazing grace it is to know that we can be known and loved. So if we know that we can be known and loved, and if we have been known and loved, then isn't it our duty to try to love others, you know? But in that, I think, in any career, if you're doing that, if you're trying to do that, it's exhausting.
You're right.
So I think a prayer, not just for me, but for everyone, is if we do that, if we try that, we will eventually become exhausted. And I joke with my husband, I have the Starbucks moment like every couple months where I say, I really just want to go work at Starbucks and give somebody this coffee that will make them really happy. And they'll always be, you know, like I just want to do something that brings joy to people, and that, you know, they're, but I think I've been called to something different, and I think a lot of us have. We've been called to do hard work.
Your hard work.
If we're working with people, it's always going to be hard work.
I was thinking yesterday about the language. It's hard to do hard work. It's hard to do good work. Maybe that was the way I was thinking yesterday, coming into this. I was thinking, it's hard to do good work in the environment. I was walking through the airport yesterday. I heard just in passing my rollerboard behind me. Somebody just said out loud as I was walking by, I live for Starbucks. Yeah. In some ways, you're saying, you know, I just wish they just wanted to be all day long like that.
Right.
I live for Starbucks. You know, but you realize that the things you do every day, they're complicated, you know, and they are hurtful, and they're wounding, and it may not all get done. But could you, by God's grace, make peace with proximate justice? Harder.
Yeah.
Maybe you realize more why those great weighty words of the liturgy are why my son put his hand on my shoulder at age 10. You know, to promise again this week, oh Jesus, oh Lord, to love and serve you this week with gladness and singleness. Because you realize that's going to cost you everything this week. Thank you. Somebody else, how can we pray for you?
I think I have three things. Try to make it quick. The first I think is along with what Luke said. I think like the nature of my job, it's like sometimes you always get hit with like problems. Like, and so I think in any job probably where it just feels like you deal with people's problems, cynicism is just really easy to be born out of. Mm-hmm. And the temptation to treat the problem as an answer that's built in a policy. You know, to make it impersonal enough that you just kind of follow the letter of a policy to make a decision, which isn't necessarily, utilizing the policy to help make a decision isn't necessarily bad, but I think it's that when it robs itself of the human element, that's when it becomes problematic. So I think one is just probably like just general prayer to not fall into the temptation for cynicism. You're like, you didn't come to work again? Why? Like, do you not know you have a job and you pay money? You know, like, it's really easy to
So you
fall
can
into
just
that.
see, pastors, why it is that somehow worthy is to week by week pray for your people, maybe even publicly out loud. Oh God, it's a wounded, broken world. Keep our people from cynicism this week. They wouldn't be overwhelmed by the wounds. Please, we pray. Yeah. 2 more people. What would you say? How can we pray for you?
I think on my side, the community aspect that I mentioned before, trying to bring that into medicine is a difficult thing, but it's something that I want to be more a part of what my practice is and what we do as a health system. And so I think that to understand people in a bigger setting is something that I'm trying to find ways to push into medicine, and I need creativity for that. I need inspiration for that. I need more than I've got for that. So
You can see why, even to pray in some ways, that we would all have eyes to see and ears to hear the depth, the range, the meaning of the work I do this week. See its meaning for life in the world. For how what you do built into this seek first the flourishing of your city. Thank you.
I would ask, to fit into that prayer, that people who teach would always be learners first. Because there are a lot of things that go into burnout, but I think one of the biggest things is feeling like, or having the pressure of having to have all the answers. And I think a good educator never expects their students to have all the answers, and that they wouldn't expect themselves to.
Yeah.
But to not ask the questions.
Yeah, thank you.